All right. Thanks everyone for being here today. We're going to jump right in. So today's session is really all along the idea of event marketing. So um, every month I do actually a lightning lesson with Maven, and I've been doing a demand gen series. So over the past, I think it's been 4 or 5 months now, I've done a different demand gen topic every month. And event marketing is one of those ones that you would think is rather boring and or traditional, or enough's been written on it, enough's been said. But what I find time and time again is that especially B2B organizations use event marketing, but and events in general, but so many of them are not tapping into the full potential of them and figuring out really how to leverage events to the max, especially in the B2B space, and then especially as you go further up market, so mid-market and enterprise. But even in SMB and or like PLG motions, event marketing can be super effective, and there's so many different ways you can use event marketing. A little bit about me: I'm a four-time B2B demand gen leader and consultant and coach. I have some courses I teach on demand gen, LinkedIn, event marketing, all sorts of fun stuff. I also do fractional consulting work, and have been an in-house and outsourced demand gen leader for over 10 years now, including doing in-house work. So a couple things. First, we're gonna basically just jump into a bunch of tips. So I basically have combined. I pulled the session from my demand gen accelerator on events, and want to share that with you today because I think it highlights a couple areas. First, it highlights how you can use it, how to prioritize events, how to prioritize the different types of events. We'll dive into webinars a bit, how I've used webinars and virtual events in particular all throughout my career, and the things you should know. And then we'll also can answer any of your questions. So this is a lightning lesson, right, with Maven. So it will be 30 minutes max. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll try to answer them throughout. And if we have time towards the end, I will be sure to get your questions answered. And then if there's a follow-up question, obviously reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me. We'll send out the recording, all that fun stuff afterwards as well. So feel free to ask me questions and or reach out to me after this workshop. Cool. So let's jump right in. So the first area I really want to talk about is the impact of event marketing. So I think one thing I like about this graph or this chart here, I think I just pulled up kind of the different impacts of event marketing and or events in the B2B space. And AI or Google gave me this output of these different areas. And I think what's interesting about event marketing is I would not think about it in a specifically top of funnel sense because it has all sorts of impacts on your organization. It is revenue, lead gen, sales, benefits, all those areas for sure. But then it also helps with conversions and engagement, customer management. It also helps with all sorts of other areas, customer marketing, customer advocacy. It can work for user groups and building community, and events are getting people together and or some sort of live experience, and really experiential events and or experiences, I think are an awesome way to differentiate your brand. And everyone needs community. Everyone needs to obviously grow and find out new resources, but they also want to connect with peers, want to connect people in the industry. It's like imperative to your development in your career and or getting new opportunities. So events are a really powerful way to drive all sorts of business objectives, and don't think about it just in the lead gen or revenue impact, even though that's a huge part of what we'll talk about today in regards to leveraging that. There's all sorts of different ways. Even looking at like events, like if you have folks in the opportunity stage, how can you meet them at a conference, or how can you engage them in other types of events, or so really every part of the buyer's journey and or customer journey, you can integrate events. Just depends on what business objectives you're trying to achieve, and or the appetite and or desire of your prospects and or customers too. Because some folks love to travel and be in person. Some folks don't. It all, there's lots of variations there. So understanding your audience is super important. But in general, I haven't found an audience that didn't like events. Even the B2C side, right? Look at like Apple and look at how they have like, you know, made one of the biggest product release events. It's a product release too. It's like not even that great. It's not even that. that much of an experience in the sense of, I mean, I've actually never been to one of them, so I'm sure maybe it's a great experience overall. But at least the live stream and the recordings is usually all product centric, right? And they still have made it this big hyped up thing and driven probably billions of dollars of revenue from that one or multi events every year around products and product releases. So don't take it for granted. I would double down, and even in this AI world, right? And especially in the world of like content and events, you can't fake events, you can't fake relationships, you can't fake community. And so I think there's events that are only going to be that much more important moving forward because of how saturated every other channel is getting, and also how AI is going to make content weird. And then lastly, relationships I think are always paramount in the B2B space for driving demand, and events and relationships are like, synonymous, right? So lots of impact. Use these stats as you're trying to get buy-in internally. Use these, conceptualize these ideas as you move forward. Okay, so let's talk about different types of events. So here's another list I pulled, which is basically just all the different formats, and there's a ton on here, right? So, and this is not even all of them. There's probably hundreds of different types of formats of virtual events, in-person events, depending on what type of stage they are in the buyer's journey. But there's all sorts of different ways you can use events and integrate them, and more the merrier, right? Obviously, like you want to make sure it matches where your company's at, your business objectives, and also what the audience wants. So it's not always going to be relevant. You may not do executive breakfasts and lunches, um, you know, uh, if you're targeting non-executives, right? So for an obvious one. Um, and then some of these work for really everyone, like webinars. I don't think, there's not an audience. I haven't found that webinars don't work for in the right format and or, on demand, all sorts of different ways you can use webinars and virtual events. Um, and depending on your ACV, your average contract annual contract value, you may use some of these and others, right? Maybe use golf outings as a an event strategy if you're in mid-market or enterprise, right? Or maybe you do a road show if you're in mid-market or enterprise. But if you're an SMB and you have a lower ACV and you don't have as much money to spend on each customer acquisition, right? Your CAC, maybe you do webinars and trade shows and product demos and seminars and customer appreciation events, industry forums. So you can pick and choose, right? Based on your needs, based upon your ACV, based on your customers. Some industries, golf is like a big thing, right? Some industries, it's not. Um, so you can pick and choose. And then as you have more budget, it's a combination of events in general. Like when you think about it from an ROI standpoint, when you think about like the larger the event or the more expensive of the event, think about it in two ways. Number one, you have a lot of people you could bring. So it's just going to make sense from an ROI standpoint, right? Maybe you're a larger company or you just have tons of customers, tons of prospects. They'll come. A certain percentage of them will convert. It doesn't matter, right? So you just go spend whatever you need to get because you just have so many opportunities and each revenue per customer. It just makes sense, right? The other way to think about it is if you're maybe a smaller company or just getting started with events, think about it from that strategic standpoint of what type of ROI can we actually get out from each one of these channels, and really think about it from the long-term standpoint because um, and if you are going to do in-person events, right? Like think about it from a cost standpoint too. Like in-person events are just be way more expensive. So maybe only do those for like, your enterprise level accounts. And if you're not in the enterprise space, maybe don't do in-person events at all, right? Um, or if you're in the SMB space and you just have thousands of customers, then maybe it does make sense to do in-person event because, 20% of them will come to your in-person event, they'll buy a ticket, whatever. So it really depends on, once again, on your business objectives, your average contract value, or how much revenue you generate per customer, a big factor. Your CAC and what you're willing to spend on each customer acquisition. And so, because event can get so exclusive that it's like, hey, we're all flying to Japan tomorrow, to meet with a prospect and a strategic partner, and you're creating an entire itinerary for a day or multi-day event for this specific account, one account, right? So like there's all sorts of things you could do, and may do based upon the revenue that you could generate or the potential revenue you could generate. Um, and then as you get bigger and as you do more events, you'll realize there's ripple effects across your whole organization that you don't you kind of think about it in like the overall you're gonna achieve so many different business objectives, even recruiting, even once again customer retention, customer expansion, not even just lead gen or revenue gen. Um, there's really there's all sorts of different ways to drive your business objectives through these different channels. So let's think about how to prioritize. So there's really five different levels I think about when it comes to events and how I think I would prioritize them if I were coming in. I haven't done any events. I'm starting from scratch. Or even if you're a large organization and you have been doing events, but you're trying to think about, hey, how do I revamp it? How do I make sure I'm not missing anything? I would prioritize it in this way. So number one is participate in other people's events. What I mean by that is first, before you do your own events, go find the industry events, this events in your space, the events where your ICP's at, where your best customers are hanging out at, and go hang out there. You can be a participant, you can be a sponsor, you could speak, you could create content there, you could attach another event on top of that other person's event, right? So go saturate. I wouldn't recommend, especially if you're just starting out, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to the large conferences, other people's conferences, or maybe it makes sense. Maybe you know you're going to meet three people there, and one of them has become a customer, and that customer is going to be millions of dollars in revenue. That makes sense to go to that one event, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue may make sense to send a person to that event. Um, so either way, look at it from that standpoint, but look at other people's events, other people's communities. Go leverage their audience before you try to build your own. So that's the best practice in general when it comes to marketing. Um, that being said, very quickly, I would start investing in your own, which is level two, and that's virtual events or a webinar series. So, very quickly, I mean, first, tapping into other people's audiences is going to be expensive, right? So long term, you're renting, the exposure to those or renting the opportunity to get in front and to build a relationship with those folks. And so very quickly, I'm always looking at how can I build my own audience, right? And my own event series and people to then come so I don't have to first I build this almost as an asset within the company, right? Within the marketing um, organization that will, has this long-term, ripple effect as you build this audience. So go look at all the other small conferences, communities you can invest in. Go do that. And then once you figure that out, get those, dozen conferences or whatever, the micro ones, and a strategy for long term, right? Maybe there's 100 conferences you could go to. And 10 of them are, within your budget that are best, best perfect fit, right? They have exactly the people you want to talk to, exactly the customers, ICP you want to talk to. Go there first, and then build out a plan for maybe like next year we might go to that other bigger conference, and you can add on down the road. Um, but once I figure that out, get those quick wins from other people's audiences, other people's events, I then want to build my own. So maybe I do a monthly webinar. Maybe I do a monthly webinar or two webinars a month, maybe one every 2 weeks, right? All depends on the size of your organization, how big your audience is, the demand for it, how much content you can create. But at least, I haven't found a company that a monthly or every other month, maybe if you're really small, um, makes sense, right? And we'll get into webinars in a second. I have a whole bunch of tips and ideas for you to think about when it comes to webinars, but that'd be level two. So I have that in place. And that's just a monthly webinar, a bi-weekly webinar, weekly webinar, whatever it is, right? Some virtual event that people can come to. I do my own monthly webinar, right? This is what you're all participating in now, right? Where every month I do a webinar. I create content from it. I'll, get people to attend live. I get people to register. I get generate leads, all sorts of fun stuff. So I do that every single month, and I recommend that, for most folks. Level two is invest in micro in-person events. So what I mean by that is this is where you can start doing your own events in person that are micro. So figuring out like maybe it's dinners, maybe it's a road show, maybe it's you're meeting specific customers and or prospects before or after a conference. It kind of ties into here a bit, but they could also just be one-off events. Maybe you're like, hey, we have a bunch of potential customers in San Francisco. Let's host a dinner with 12 executives, invite those 12 CEOs or whoever it is to that dinner. And that can be its own in-person event, right? It makes sense to focus on that. The next, and those in-person events, yeah, are really powerful, and especially when you have the right, if you can justify it from an ACV standpoint, if you have, mid-market enterprise deals, in-person micro events are where it's at for sure. Um, and micro can be, obviously a few people to dozen, and then, probably caps out at 50 people or 25 people or something, right? As you get bigger than that, you kind of get into the more conference seminar, multi-day or single day or multi-day event. Um, and then level four is looking at multi-session virtual events. So after you've built, so you're participating in other people's events, you're doing your own virtual webinars, right? Those are short, hour-long max events every month. You're doing in-person events, and then after that, I would do like a multi-session, multi-day virtual summit, right? Maybe once or twice a year, you could do a multi-day summit, and then after that, I would do your own conference. So from the conference standpoint, this is where there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of investment. And that's why I think it's the last on the list in the sense of priority for most companies that I've worked with and been involved in. That being said, it may make sense for your organization. So this priority may be different for you, right? Based upon your ICP, based upon your budget, based upon what's already worked for you or what you areas you want to explore, and you might want to prioritize it different. That being said, in-person conferences, highest risk, highest expense, but potentially the highest ROI, right? But just proceed with caution on that. Usually I wait for people to ask for an in-person event or an in-person conference. I use, multiple hundreds of people there. I usually wait for people to ask for that after we've done all these other things. They're like, hey, we'd love to get in person, or we've built up the audience so that when we invite people in person, it's so easy to sell tickets. It's so easy to fill out the hotel block, and it's a no-brainer. Cool. So those are areas to participate. Let's talk about webinars for a bit. So I have a bunch of stuff on here. You can use this. Obviously, this will be recorded. You can come back and look at this as you're doing webinars. I'm going to go through this quickly, but here's a bunch of tips for you. Number one, do a recurring webinar program. Let people, as people expect it, or as people consume multiple webinars, they're going to anticipate you sending them an invite for next month, right? So everyone that's on this or watching this, you will not be surprised when I send you next month's Demand Gen Series webinar invite, right? Because a lot of you have been to last month's, and you are on this one. You're expecting next month's, right? I think it's one of the best lead gen slash um, owned audience builders. I think it's even better than newsletters. Unless you're a writer and you love writing, I think virtual events are easier to execute, provides more value potentially, and has way more purposes and drives. Yeah, I think, and you can do both, obviously, but webinar program, a huge benefit, especially like, okay, you generate leads from it. It's a natural lead gen, right? People are like, hey, here's my email to get reminders, no brainer. Um, and then you create long form content, you create video content, you create content with other people, not just you, which we'll talk about here in a second. Um, as it relates to topics, though, before we get into people and we talk about integrating other people, topics, I do recommend a mix of content. So number one, start with thought leadership. Start with something that's valuable, right? Start with something that's technical. Start with something that is, they get something of value, right? So as you're watching this webinar, right, I hope that you all walk away with some new insight and some new perspective, something to implement now. This could sometimes be 2 or 3 degrees away from your product. Um, my situation, event marketing is actually pretty close to my product. So it's probably a second degree or even first degree because I do event marketing. I teach event marketing. I do event marketing. I help people with consulting with event marketing. So it's pretty close to my product, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the topic is not like at the core of what I do. And that's okay because my ICP needs it. It helps them solve a problem. It builds trust, builds that brand awareness. But still integrate product demo webinars, right? You can still add product demo webinars, um, and you but sprinkle them in. So what I recommend is sprinkling them in. Do them, once a quarter, or if you do a monthly webinar, do your monthly webinar. Make it all thought leadership based, top of funnel, generating leads, creating content, building trust, and then maybe once a month or once every 2 months do a live product demo focused webinar, right? It's very sales focused, very demo focused. Those are great too. But I recommend starting with thought leadership because that's the best way to drive that top of funnel, get people interested, build that list, build that interaction, and then you can sprinkle in the product demo focused. Make your top topics relevant. So What I mean by that, it seems pretty obvious, but you want to be relevant and you want to be unique. So relevant as in your ICP, your ideal customer cares about it right now. It's relevant to them right now. And then you want it to be unique. So what are you talking about that your competitors are not talking about, right? So if you can match those two things, you win when it comes to any type of content creation, and webinars are no exception, or events are no exception. Let's talk about timelines. So for webinars in particular, only thing I like about webinars is a pretty fast execution. If you have internal speakers or you're doing it yourself, or you have, the speakers are lined up and it's the content doesn't need to be developed, doesn't take a long time to develop the content, or maybe they've done this create, they've distributed this content before, you can prepare in a couple weeks, 1 to 2 weeks. If you have outside speakers, you're gonna need more time. It could be months, right? If you have a speaker that's popular or it takes a long time, or if you have a multi-session event, or if you have multiple speakers in one session, basically the more complex you get, the more time you need. So that 1 to 2 weeks could go to 1 to 2 months, right? Or 3 to 6 months, depending on the size of the event, or 6 to 12 months, or even longer than that if it's an in-person large event. For webinars in particular, at least 3 to 4 weeks to promote. So if I'm doing a free webinar, 1 hour webinar, I want at least 3 to 4 weeks to promote. And then guests and speakers. These are all the different types of folks I would include in my webinar series. And the reason why is, first, no one wants to hear from you every month. That being said, I do my webinars solo. But the content's different every month, so it's a little bit of a different situation. But if your CEO is going on every month and they're doing similar content every single month, people are going to get burnt out on it and they're not going to be interested in it. So it's great to integrate other folks outside of your subject matter expert or your internal founder or whoever. And integrate. I mean, customers have customers on. One of my favorite webinar formats are um, a customer, a prospect, and internal SMEs having a group discussion, because you're building relationships with your prospects, you're leveraging customer social proof, you're all creating valuable thought leadership content, right? That's driving leads, building trust, building an audience. So huge win there. I love combining different types of speakers as it relates to webinars. And then obviously, if you're doing a conference or a multi-session, maybe you have all these types of speakers speak, right? So you're integrating all these different voices. And then obviously they can help you amplify the content, amplify the marketing by helping you market it, all sorts of benefits. Other formats I kind of already hinted at this, but a solo presentation is great, like kind of what I'm doing now. Um, I recommend like a high energy, high value type of interaction when it comes to that, fast pace, kind of what I'm doing now. A group panel discussion could be 3 or 4 people, right? All discussing a different topic. A two-person panel, right, could be more like a podcast format where two people are discussing and having more of a conversation. And Ask Me Anything is like more of you just letting people come and ask you questions. And it's kind of an open forum, right? A couple other tips here I would also recommend is landing pages. If you're just starting doing webinars, you haven't done any of them at all, start with Zoom Webinar. They actually have a pretty good overall solution as landing pages and or execution of the webinar live. It's a great, from 0 to 1. You can always look at other webinar platforms out there. And then make sure you have a good graphic designer, creating eye-catching banners. Always something worthwhile to invest in, and worthwhile to invest into your graphics. And then lastly, a couple other things here from the event standpoint, from the webinar standpoint, is make sure, once again, 3 to 4 weeks to promote. Use LinkedIn events. So you can create an event on LinkedIn, and people can register on LinkedIn. They actually put in their email address, their first name, all that fun stuff. Um, and then you take those registrations and you put them in Zoom, or you put them in wherever you're hosting your webinar. And what's cool about it is you can invite up to 1,000 people per week of first degree connections. So let's say like I have 20,000 connections, maybe 15,000 connections, and then 10,000 followers or something. Those 15,000 connections, I can invite those folks to my webinar. And I've driven hundreds of leads for myself, probably thousands of leads for myself, and then also, thousands of leads with this strategy for people I've worked with. So really cool way to drive leads, because you could use every single sales rep, every single person in your company, every single speaker can all do this. and you could all drive, lots and lots of leads to this page. So I got a link in here in this slide deck, which I'll send out the slides afterwards, that you can look at how to use this registration form on LinkedIn. But essentially, you create a LinkedIn event, and then you go create a LinkedIn event and click the option to have folks register on LinkedIn. And then they give you your email address. They give you their email address, all that fun stuff. Other things to do: run run ads on low cost platforms like Facebook and Instagram. If you have the right targeting in place, Facebook and Instagram and Meta platforms are great, and you can drive some great leads and ultimately registrants to your webinar. Number D here is multiple email marketing to your opt-in list. So if you already have a marketing list, right, invite those folks multiple times to your upcoming event. Great way to get people re-engaged, make sure they got the invite, and get them get on their calendar. You can sponsor a community or newsletter that's in your space that you want to get in front of to promote your event. You can invite guests through outbound sales team, have them do one-to-one emails, right? So not only can you do bulk emails through email marketing, but you can have your sales team invite people. One great way I love outbound is using outbound to build relationships, distributing content, inviting them to webinars, etc. Use your sales team to drive leads to your webinar, to your conference, to whatever events you're doing. Post on social media, obviously. Ask your speakers to post at least once and/or promote through LinkedIn events, and post in different communities where appropriate. Find a community, and ultimately, if a lot of communities let you post things right in their free kind of channel, um, member channel. Go on there and post it, and you could drive, maybe not hundreds of leads, depending on how big the community is. If you sponsor, probably you get hundreds of leads, maybe, but you get a handful of leads, and a great way to get your event out there, a great way to get some free marketing. These are awesome ways, and I've driven, without having to spend any money on ads, even though I do recommend, you can spend money on ads for sure to drive leads, thousands of leads, right, from these different strategies. And so there's no reason why you can't get folks registered to your event. Now, if your event converts and if it actually provides value, a lot of that's up to you, right? But there's a lot of strategies to get your event out there, get registrants. That's probably the biggest thing I hear from people is how do we get more folks registered to our events, engaged in our events. A lot of it's about the topic, the content, the cadence, all that fun stuff like I talked about earlier. But a lot of it's also promotion, right? You got to think about your event as a product in of itself. And that's actually the best way to think about content and or marketing or demand gen. Think about it as a product in of itself. Think about it as a way to provide value, a vehicle to provide value, build relationships at scale. Really bullish on webinars, events in general. So don't take it for granted. Go the extra mile, figure out how to use them, do them well, um, drive leads, drive new customers, keep more customers, and webinars are an awesome way to start. A couple of things here in closing are repurpose them. So, like this webinar, right? I'm going to repurpose it into a long form webinar that you can watch the recording, watch it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, on my website. People can watch it there. I'll run it as an ad so people can watch it and engage with it long term. I'll probably create a blog post on my website with the content, using AI to summarize the content. I'll create some LinkedIn content out of it. I'll create social posts out of it. And I'll take this long form content, right, and repurpose it into a bunch of different ways. And generating leads long term, generating awareness long term, and kind of have that evergreen content. Some bonuses here: make it interactive, right? People ask people questions. This shorter lightning lesson that I'm doing now is not a great example of the interactive because it's so short. But ideally talk with people, not at them, right? Ask them questions, do polls, have people on stage, do quizzes, do games, especially if you have an hour and you have more time for a Q&A, or if you have an hour or 90 minutes, right? If you want to do even longer format. Gather first-party data, right? Ask qualifying questions. So one thing you can do in your webinar form is ask qualifying questions, get insights into what they're doing. Those 3 to 5 questions your sales teams ask folks in the sales process, integrate those questions into your marketing, right? Whether it's lead forms, start asking those questions throughout your marketing. Try to get those insights in advance. That way the sales teams knows who to prioritize and you can better capture demand. Then last but not least, ask Q&A questions in advance. Another form thing you can do in the form is ask Q&A questions in advance. Like, hey, what do you want to learn in this webinar, in this event? What are you hoping to learn? What are you hoping to achieve? And that can help you dictate your agenda. So if you get hundreds of people registering for your event, maybe 10% of them will answer this question. That's 10 or 20 responses that will give you insights into what your content should be, what your agenda should be, what should your Q&A questions, what should your run of show questions be for your speakers or for your presentation. Really cool way to get insights in advance of your webinar to help dictate your content and engage people too, right? You can be like, hey, this person asked this question. It can also help you fill out your Q&A question area if you don't have a lot of folks live on your first initial events. When you fill that area out with pre-scripted Q&A questions that people have asked in advance. Awesome. So we are up on time here. I know we went through a lot of stuff. What's next? If you want to learn more and work with me, I have a couple different things. Two upcoming kind of courses. Number one, I have my LinkedIn for B2B growth boot camps. I've used LinkedIn to generate millions of dollars of revenue for myself, for companies I've worked with, in-house as a marketing consultant. So I have a multi-day, 4-day live course that's going into how to use LinkedIn for sales, marketing, to drive more leads, more demand, and more revenue. And then second here, I have a live and actually now on demand B2B demand gen accelerator, which is a little bit longer than the bootcamp, the LinkedIn bootcamp, and it's actually more comprehensive, right? I go into all sorts of demand gen topics, from events to partnerships to a little bit of LinkedIn, go-to-market stuff, all sorts of things. So I got a bunch there. Go to taylorwells.com. All my links, all my courses, all my classes. If you want to work with me, also you can go check it out there. Also check out Maven if you want to do. Maven is where I host all my live courses. So if I do anything live, it's through Maven. Anything on demand is through taylorwells.com. Obviously, any consulting or whatever, reach out to me at taylorwells.com. Awesome. I think we are up on time, and we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining. Once again, check out next month. I'll be doing another demand gen series topic. So look out for an invite for that. I'll send out the recording for everything here. Reach out to me at taylorwells.com if you have any questions, comments, or follow-ups. Thanks everyone. Take care.